The smell hit me first. Not the usual California suburban perfume of cut grass and distant pool chlorine. No, this was the acrid, angry scent of something valuable turning to ash. Thick, ugly smoke was starting to boil into the otherwise perfect blue sky just a few houses down. Mrs. Henderson's place. Sweet old lady, collects porcelain cats. Her house. The one that backs right onto that tinder-dry patch of canyon brush everyone's been nervous about all summer. "Sarah, you smell that?" I yell, already moving. "That's not a barbecue." Sarah's at the window, her face paling. "Oh my God, Mike! That's... Call 911!" I'm already dialing, heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Out on the street, neighbors are starting to trickle out of their air-conditioned bunkers, faces pinched with worry. Sirens, faint at first, then growing, a welcome sound. Help is on the way. Or so I thought. Because as the first fire engine, a smaller brush truck, tries to make the turn into our little cul-de-sac, there she is, Brenda, HOA president. Brenda, in all her beige pant-suited glory, standing smack in the middle of the access road like a particularly stubborn garden gnome. Arms crossed, face set in that familiar expression of someone who's just discovered a dandelion on their prize-winning lawn. The fire captain, a guy who looks like he eats nails for breakfast, leans out of his window, siren winding down. "Ma'am, we have a reported brush fire escalating. We need to get through now." Brenda doesn't budge. If anything, she seems to puff up. "This is a private access road for Cottonwood Creek Estates residents and approved vendors only," she declared, her voice carrying over the nervous murmurs of the onlookers. "Your vehicle clearly exceeds the designated weight limit for this decorative paving. It's in the bylaws. Section 12, subsection C, paragraph 4. Are you an approved vendor? Do you have an access permit?" I swear you could have heard a pin drop on the non-decorative public access asphalt I was standing on. My jaw was probably somewhere around my knees. This woman, this actual woman, was debating paving integrity with a fire captain while Mrs. Henderson's prize-winning rose bushes were about to go up like a July 4th fireworks display. The captain's face was turning a shade of red that wasn't on any approved HOA color palette. I can tell you that much. "Ma'am, there's a fire! People's homes, lives could be in danger." Brenda sniffed. "And I am in danger of this road cracking. The replacement cost for this imported Italian cobblestone is exorbitant. I'll need to see your paperwork." That's when it hit me. This wasn't just an HOA dispute anymore. This was an opportunity. A ridiculous, probably illegal, once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. I looked at the smoke, then at Brenda, then at the impotent fire truck. An idea, a truly terrible, magnificent idea, began to bloom in my head, fully formed and roaring like a V12 diesel. "Sarah," I said, turning to my wife who had just run up beside me, eyes wide with disbelief at the scene. "She's not going to move, is she?" Sarah just stared, mesmerized by the sheer audacity of Brenda. "Mike, what are you thinking? You have that look, the one you get before you buy something on eBay that weighs more than our car." "I'm thinking," I said, a slow grin spreading across my face, "that I have a very large, very red key to this particular problem. And it's about a 20-minute drive away if I absolutely floor it. Call my buddy Dave at the farm. Tell him it's an emergency. A big, red 60-foot emergency. Yeah, this is how I ended up about to drive a decommissioned 30-ton aerial ladder fire engine into a suburban HOA standoff. But to really understand the beautiful absurdity of it all, we need to rewind a bit, because my war with HOA President Brenda didn't start with actual fire. It started with a dream of beige resistance and a really, really big workshop. It all started, as most of my brilliant/terrible ideas do, with a Tuesday night and too much caffeine. I'd been scrolling through man caves monthly. Don't judge. And the vision just slammed into me. I needed a workshop. Not just a corner of the garage with a pegboard kind of workshop. I'm talking a 2-story drive-in-your-projects soundproofed Valhalla of DIY. A place where I could work on my, well, let's call them a larger-scale restoration projects. More on those later. My wife, Sarah, is a saint. Truly. When I showed her the scribbled plans that looked suspiciously like a small aircraft hangar, she just sighed, took a sip of her wine, and said, "Mike, are you sure this isn't going to annoy the neighbors? It's substantial. The kind of substantial that blocks out the sun for small principalities." "Honey," I'd said, with all the confidence of a man who's just had 3 espressos, "it's art and storage. Mostly storage for very artistic things. They'll love the property value increase. It'll be an architectural statement. We'd just bought the house in Cottonwood Creek Estates. Sunny California, quiet streets, good schools. It seemed perfect. The HOA fees were a bit steep, but the welcome packet made it sound like they were mostly concerned with keeping the communal petunias perky. Spoiler alert, the petunias were the least of their worries. Or rather, the least of my worries. The welcome wagon arrived a week after we moved in. Except it wasn't a wagon. There were no freshly baked cookies, and the welcome felt more like an audit conducted by the Beige Inquisition. Presiding over this solemn occasion was Brenda. Brenda, HOA president. 40s, maybe 50s, with a haircut you could set your watch by, and eyes that seemed to scan for code violations even in her sleep. She was all smiles, but they didn't quite reach the aforementioned eyes. More like a baring of teeth before a lecture. She handed over the HOA Bible, a binder easily 3 inches thick, filled with rules about everything from the precise Pantone shade of your mailbox flag, must be patriotic yet subdued red, to the maximum allowable decibels for wind chimes. Spoiler, it's basically silence. "Welcome to Cottonwood Creek Estates, Mr. Henderson," she chirped, the sound like styrofoam rubbing together. "We pride ourselves on maintaining a harmonious living environment." "Thanks, Brenda," I said, trying for breezy and unthreatening. "Looking forward to settling in. Just planning a small workshop out back, you know, for hobbies. Nothing too crazy." I mentally crossed my fingers. Brenda's smile tightened. Just a fraction, but enough to make the air temperature drop a few degrees. "Oh, a workshop," she said, the word workshop sounding like I'd just confessed to planning a covert llama breeding operation. "All external structures, modifications, or indeed expressions of individual taste require prior written approval from the Architectural Review Committee, of which I am the chair. Section 4, subsection B, paragraph 3. You'll find the aesthetic guidelines quite specific." "Right," I said. "Harmonious." I had a bad feeling brewing, the kind of feeling you get when you realize the slightly used car you just bought was previously owned by a family of particularly aggressive raccoons. A few weeks later, armed with professionally drawn blueprints that had cost me a small fortune, I stood before the Architectural Review Committee, which was, of course, Brenda, flanked by 2 other residents, Gerald and Agnes. Gerald looked like he'd rather be undergoing a root canal without anesthetic, and Agnes was knitting something that appeared to be a tea cozy for a Sherman tank. I laid out my plans, the glorious 2-story workshop, the tasteful yet manly rustic barn-red siding, the strategically placed soundproofing. Brenda peered at the plans through her reading glasses, which were, naturally, beige. She wielded a red pen like a surgeon about to remove a particularly offensive organ. "Well, Mr. Henderson," she began, tapping a perfectly manicured nail on the roofline. "The primary roof pitch is 2.3 degrees, off the mandated regulation pitch of 22.5 degrees, as per Appendix G, Figure 3A. I blinked. 2.3 degrees? Brenda, that's practically immeasurable without scientific equipment. It meets all local building codes. Local codes are a minimum standard, dear, she said, a hint of pity in her voice that made my teeth ache. We, here at Cottonwood Creek, operate on a higher plane of conformity. And this siding color you've specified, rustic barn red, she shuddered delicately, is most emphatically not on the approved exterior palette. We have desert sandstone, gentle fawn, slightly darker beige than desert sandstone, but not quite fawn, and, for the truly adventurous, off-white wonder. Gerald coughed, a small, strangled sound. Agnes's knitting needles clicked with judgmental precision. But rustic barn red is a classic, I protested, my dream workshop slowly dissolving into a puddle of insipid earth tones. It's iconic. It speaks of heritage, of craftsmanship. Brenda gave me a look usually reserved for people who let their dogs poop on her prize-winning, regulation-height Bermuda grass. It speaks of barns, Mr. Henderson. We are not a community of agricultural laborers. We are a community of tasteful beige appreciators, I argued. I pleaded. I offered to plant a veritable forest of HOA-approved, non-offensive shrubbery around the entire structure. I even suggested a compromise. Slightly rusty beige? She was a brick wall. A beige brick wall, probably built to exact HOA specifications. My workshop plans were returned to me, bleeding red ink. Defeated, I retreated to Plan B, a much smaller, single-story shed. Just something to store the lawnmower and maybe a few tools. Surely that would pass muster. It did, with the caveat that it had to be painted, gentle fawn, and its door couldn't have more than 4 panels. A few days after the shed was approved, a small, hollow victory, the first real shot in the Great Beige War was fired. I found an official-looking envelope in my mailbox. Inside, a crisp, laser-printed citation. Violation: improper storage of construction materials as per Bylaw 17. Subsection F, unsightly accumulations. The unsightly accumulation in question? A neatly stacked pallet of lumber delivered that very morning at 9 a.m. by Home Depot, intended for the approved Gentle Fawn shed. It was on my own driveway, well away from the sidewalk. I called Sarah, fuming. She cited me for lumber, Sarah. Lumber that's going into the shed she approved. It hasn't even been there for 3 hours. Sarah, ever the voice of reason, sighed. Deep breaths, Mike. Did you leave it out where it could be seen from the street? It's a driveway, Sarah. That's where drivable things deliver other things. She must have spies, or surveillance drones, beige-plated, silent, rule-enforcing drones. My eye was already twitching. This wasn't just about a workshop anymore. This was about a man's right to own lumber on his own property for a period exceeding a gnat's lifespan. To build my little Gentle Fawn shed of compliance, I hired Sal's Construction. Sal was a burly, no-nonsense guy whose forearms were thicker than my thighs. His motto, printed on his slightly grease-stained business card, was, "We get it done. No fuss, no muss, no beige." I liked him immediately. His crew was a collection of equally no-nonsense individuals, including a quiet giant named Tiny, who looked like he could arm-wrestle a cement mixer and win. The moment Sal's truck, a robust Ford F-350, rumbled onto my street, Brenda materialized. It was like she had a sixth sense for unapproved paint jobs and vehicles exceeding a certain unwritten level of masculinity. She was out there with a tape measure, actually measuring the length of Sal's truck where it sat parked innocuously by the curb in front of my house. "Is that commercial vehicle," she began, addressing Tiny, who was unloading a wheelbarrow, "going to be parked on residential asphalt for more than the allotted 2-hour window for temporary contractor access as per bylaw 7.4, subsection Q?" Tiny paused, wheelbarrow midair, and gave Brenda a slow, deliberate look. "Lady," he rumbled, his voice like gravel in a coffee can, "we're building a shed. It ain't gonna build itself telepathically while we park 3 blocks away and shuttle lumber via carrier pigeon." I hurried out, plastering on my best good neighbor smile. "Brenda, they're just getting started. They'll be as quick and unobtrusive as possible. Sal runs a tight ship." Brenda's gaze flicked to me, then back to the truck, then to a small, almost invisible smudge of mud on its tire. "Efficiency is appreciated, Mr. Henderson. Compliance is mandatory, and I trust they'll be hosing down the street to remove any construction residue?" Sal, who had ambled over, just shook his head. "Mike," he said, loud enough for Brenda to hear, "you didn't tell me the welcoming committee came with its own ruler and a PhD in annoyance." Brenda bristled. "I am ensuring adherence to the community standards that maintain our property values, Mr. Sal," he supplied. "And my property value just went down listening to this. We'll be quick, lady. Try not to strain yourself." From that day on, it was a war of attrition, a relentless barrage of petty tyranny, all delivered with Brenda's signature saccharine smile and a freshly printed violation notice. My grass was cited for being a 1/4 inch too high the day after my gardener had been. An anonymous complaint. I could feel Brenda's laser eyes boring into my soul from across the street, was filed about my unsettling garden gnome. The gnome in question was a cheerful little fellow my 5-year-old niece had painted for me. Apparently his slightly lopsided smile and vibrant, non-beige hat were deemed aesthetically disruptive. I tried talking to Gerald, my next-door neighbor, a quiet retiree who mostly communicated in nervous nods. I caught him one evening while he was surreptitiously watering his non-regulation petunias. He kept them hidden behind a large, HOA-approved ornamental rock. "Is she always like this, Gerald?" I asked, gesturing vaguely towards Brenda's house, which I swear seemed to radiate an aura of oppressive beige. Gerald glanced around like he was about to divulge state secrets. "Son," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the chirping of crickets, which were probably also on some HOA watch list for excessive nighttime noise. "You have no idea. She once tried to ban Halloween decorations, said they weren't historically accurate to the region's founding period. We live in a 1980s housing development built on what used to be a walnut grove." He shook his head. "The Walnut Grove Massacre of 22, they called it. Costumes confiscated. Candy impounded. It was grim." My frustration was a living thing now, coiling in my gut. This wasn't about rules. It was about power. Brenda was a petty dictator, and I was her new, unwilling subject. My workshop dream was on life support, and even my gnome wasn't safe. Then came the sabotage. One morning, Sal's crew arrived to find their carefully measured and staked out foundation lines for my little shed moved. Not just knocked over by a stray cat or a gust of wind. These stakes had been pulled up and precisely repositioned about 3 feet to the left, completely skewing the planned layout. Sal stood there, hands on his hips, surveying the scene with a thunderous expression. "Mike," he said, his voice dangerously calm, "I'm telling you, someone messed with these. My guys triple-check everything. We don't make mistakes like this. This is deliberate. This is sabotage." A cold knot formed in my stomach. You think Brenda would actually—" Sal gave me a pointed look. "I'm not saying names, Mike, but if the shoe fits, and it's a sensible HOA-approved orthopedic loafer in a neutral tone, well, he let the sentence hang in the air. This was beyond petty. This was actively trying to cost me money, delay my project, and probably drive me slowly insane. That evening, I installed a security camera, a very discreet one, cleverly disguised as a particularly uninteresting rock near my front flower bed. If Brenda was going to play dirty, then so was I. Sort of. My version of dirty was more collecting irrefutable video evidence for a potential restraining order than actual dirt. The next few weeks were a tense ceasefire. The shed went up slowly, with Sal's crew practically working under armed guard against further bylaw infractions or nocturnal stake relocations. Gentle fawn it was. 4-panel door it had. It was the most depressing monument to forced conformity I'd ever had the misfortune to own. Meanwhile, my real passion project was calling to me. Sarah found me one night, hunched over my laptop, a conspiratorial glow illuminating my face. "Mike, what are you looking at now?" she asked. Her voice laced with that familiar tone of loving suspicion she reserved for my late-night internet rabbit holes. Is it another A, historically significant but financially ruinous collectible, B, power tool that requires its own substation, or C, a guide on how to build a trebuchet to launch water balloons at Brenda's prize-winning roses? I quickly minimized the browser window, but not before she caught a glimpse of the auction site. "Nothing, honey. Just appreciating automotive history, educational purposes." Okay, confession time. It's probably best you know the full extent of my eccentricity, my larger-scale restoration projects. I collect and restore old service vehicles. It started small with a vintage police motorcycle. Then came a beautifully dilapidated 1960s ambulance. Then a monster of a 1970s tow truck that I was convinced I could turn into the ultimate tailgating machine. Each one was a labor of love, a greasy, rust-stained testament to a bygone era of American iron. And a few months before the Brenda Blitzkrieg began, I'd made my magnum opus of ridiculous acquisitions. I'd found it on a municipal surplus auction site, listed between a pallet of unclaimed traffic cones and a slightly used Zamboni. A 1985 Grumman Aerial Cat 60-foot articulating ladder engine. Decommissioned, naturally. It needed work, a lot of work, but it was all there. The massive diesel engine, the intricate hydraulic systems, the towering ladder. An absolute steal. It was magnificent, a 30-ton, 60-foot-long testament to man's ability to say, "That fire is very high up, but I have a plan." It wasn't specifically for the workshop, you understand. Well, not entirely. I mean, where else was I going to store a ladder engine if not in a colossal, custom-built workshop? But mostly, it was just awesome. It was currently residing at my buddy Dave's farm, about 20 minutes out of town, nestled between a barn full of surprisingly placid cows and a field of aggressively organic kale. Dave thought I was nuts, but he had a soft spot for anything with an engine bigger than his tractors. The thought of Brenda discovering its existence was a source of constant, low-level amusement. She would have an aneurysm, a perfectly regulated HOA bylaw-compliant aneurysm, of course, which, I had to admit, wasn't entirely a downside to the fantasy. Little did I know, my appreciating automotive history was about to become an active participant in neighborhood diplomacy. Or, you know, chaos. Potato, potato. The smoke was no longer a distant concern. It was a presence. A thick, acrid blanket rolling through Cottonwood Creek estates, making eyes water and throats catch. Mrs. Henderson, bless her heart, was on her tiny porch, a frail silhouette against the increasingly orange sky, clutching one of her porcelain cats. The wind, which had been a gentle California breeze all day, was starting to get frisky, gusting and swirling, pushing the flames from the dry brush with alarming speed towards the back of her neatly kept, beige-adjacent house. The small fire engine was still stuck at the cul-de-sac entrance, its crew engaged in a battle of wills with Brenda that they were clearly, spectacularly losing. The fire captain's face was a study in controlled fury. He was trying to explain the concept of imminent danger to a woman who seemed to believe the greatest threat facing mankind was an unapproved mailbox color. "Ma'am," he was saying, his voice tight, "every second you delay us, that fire gets closer. There are structures, lives at risk. We need access now." Brenda, incredibly, consulted a small, laminated card she produced from her beige blazer pocket. As per the Cottonwood Creek Estates Emergency Access Protocol Revised Edition, Summer 2023, all non-resident vehicles requiring access during a declared situational urgency, a term I am not yet prepared to apply to this minor thermal event, must present identification and state their purpose to the designated HOA safety liaison, which is myself. "A minor thermal event?" the captain exploded. "Lady, that's a brush fire heading for a gas grill on that woman's patio. Do you understand what combustion means?" It was at this precise moment, watching Brenda adjust her sensible shoes while effectively drawing a defensive line against the forces of reason and public safety, that my terrible, beautiful plan clicked fully into place. The ladder engine. It wasn't just a ridiculous collectible anymore. It was a 60-foot, 30-ton, cherry-red, diesel-powered argument against bureaucratic stupidity. I grabbed Sarah's arm. "She's not going to move, is she?" Sarah shook her head, her eyes still fixed on Brenda's unbelievable performance. "I think she'd rather see the whole neighborhood go up in smoke than admit she's wrong about a bylaw." "Mike, what are you thinking? You have that look again. The I'm about to do something that will end up on YouTube look." "I'm thinking," I said, the words tumbling out with a manic energy, "that I have a very large, very red key to this particular problem. It's at Dave's farm. 20 minutes if I break a few minor traffic laws. Call him. Tell him it's an emergency. A big red 60-foot fire-breathing emergency. Tell him Mike needs the big girl, and he needs her now." Sarah stared at me, a mixture of horror and dawning comprehension on her face. The fire truck? Mike, you can't be serious. You'll be arrested. Or worse, you'll get a citation from Brenda for unapproved vehicle operation. "Desperate times, Sarah," I said, already backing away, fishing my truck keys out of my pocket. "Besides, think of the story. Now call Dave. Go, go, go." The drive to Dave's farm was a blur. I vaguely remember Sarah on the phone, her voice a rising crescendo of disbelief and frantic explanation. "No, Dave, a real fire truck. Yes, Mike bought it. It's a long story. Just get the barn door open and for God's sake, check the tires." Dave, bless his perpetually bewildered kale farming heart, was waiting for me by the time my pickup skidded to a halt in his dusty yard. The massive red flank of the Grumman aerial cat loomed out of the barn, glinting in the hazy sunlight. She was a beast, an absolute, beautiful, ridiculous beast. "Mike, you lost your damn mind?" Dave yelled over the sudden, ear-splitting roar as I hit the starter. The big diesel coughed, sputtered, then caught with a plume of black smoke that would have given Brenda a fatal case of the vapors. What in tarnation is going on? "No time, Dave," I shouted back, wrestling with the massive steering wheel. "Neighborhood's on fire. HOA president's gone rogue. It's a whole thing. Just wish me luck and don't tell my insurance company." Driving a 30-ton ladder engine on public roads when you're not, shall we say, officially sanctioned to do so, is an experience. It's like trying to pilot a particularly stubborn whale through a maze made of jello. The steering has about a quarter turn of play before anything actually happens. The brakes are more of a polite suggestion than a command. and every pothole feels like a direct hit from a meteor. But the air horn? The air horn was glorious. It parted traffic like Moses parted the Red Sea. People stared, jaws dropped. Small children pointed with a mixture of awe and terror. I probably violated 17 different vehicle codes on that 20-minute drive. But Mrs. Henderson's collection of delicate, irreplaceable porcelain cats was on the line. And, her life. Priorities. Back in Cottonwood Creek Estates, the scene had escalated. The smoke was thicker, angrier. The first fire crew was still held captive by Brenda's iron will and laminated bylaw cards. Now, 2 police cruisers were also on scene, their flashing lights adding to the general air of chaotic impotence. Officer Miller, young, barely out of the academy by the looks of him, was earnestly trying to reason with Brenda. Officer Davis, older, with a face that had seen more crazy than a psychiatric ward on a full moon, was leaning against his cruiser, arms crossed, radiating an aura of weary resignation. "Ma'am," Officer Miller was saying, his voice strained, "with all due respect, and I really mean all due respect, you are actively obstructing emergency services. That is a jailable offense. You need to let these firefighters pass. Now!" Brenda, if possible, drew herself up even straighter. "And you need to respect private property rights and the established governance of this common interest development, officer. This is an HOA matter. It will be resolved according to the procedures outlined in our covenants, conditions, and restrictions, a copy of which I can provide if you haven't received one." It was at that precise moment that I made my grand entrance. The distinctive, earth-shattering blast of the aerial cat's air horns cut through the tension like a chainsaw through butter. Heads snapped around. Conversations died mid-sentence. Even the crackle of the approaching fire seemed to pause for a moment, as if in bewildered respect. I rumbled around the corner, the massive red engine dwarfing everything in sight, the police cruisers, the other fire truck, Brenda's ego, which was saying something. I brought the behemoth to a surprisingly gentle stop, strategically positioned just off the main road. Lights, okay, mostly just the hazard lights, and a few enthusiastically blinking clearance markers I'd wired up, flashing with what I hoped was an air of official urgency rather than madman on a joyride. Dead silence. Brenda's mouth, which had been forming the words unauthorized decibel levels, was agape. Her laminated card fluttered from her nerveless fingers. The fire crew stared. Officer Miller's jaw was unhinged. Officer Davis just slowly shook his head, a small, almost imperceptible smile playing on his lips. I leaned out of the cab, trying for an expression of calm, neighborly concern. "Afternoon, everyone," I called out, my voice surprisingly steady. "Brenda, lovely day for a, well, Captain," I nodded to the stunned fire captain. "Looks like you could use a little elevation and maybe about 1,000 gallons of water per minute. I happen to have some spare, and my ladder reaches 60 feet. Just saying. From, over here, without touching any of that precious decorative paving." The fire captain, a man I was rapidly starting to admire, just stared. From Brenda to me, to the colossal red machine I was piloting, then back to me. A slow grin. The grin of a man who has just been handed an unexpected bazooka in the middle of a knife fight, spread across his face. "Son," he said, his voice filled with a dawning, incredulous joy. "Who the hell are you, and where in God's name did you get that?" I gave him my most charming aw shucks, just a guy helping out smile. "Mike Henderson, Captain. Concerned citizen and enthusiastic restorer of robust, historically significant firefighting apparatus. She's a beauty, isn't she? 1985 Grumman aerial cat. Allison automatic, Detroit diesel. Now about that fire encroaching on Mrs. Henderson's prize-winning petunias." Officer Davis pushed himself off his cruiser and ambled over, his expression one of profound, weary amusement. He addressed Officer Miller, who was still trying to process the sudden appearance of a civilian-operated aerial ladder truck at an HOA dispute. "Well, Miller," Davis said, his voice dry as desert sand. "Can't say I've seen this particular maneuver in the old Police Academy handbook. 10 out of 10 for creativity and sheer unadulterated chutzpah, though." Miller finally found his voice, though it was a bit squeaky. He turned to me. "Sir," he began, automatically reaching for his notepad. "Is this vehicle currently street legal? And are you in fact authorized to operate it in an emergency capacity?" "Perfectly legal, officer," I assured him, patting the big red door. "Just had her smogged and registered. She's classified as a historical vehicle, hence the slightly enthusiastic dimensions." "And as for authorization," I winked, "let's just say I'm making a citizen's arrest of that fire. The flames aren't exactly waiting around for the correct permits to be filed in triplicate, are they?" "Brenda," I called out, turning my attention to the still paralyzed HOA president. "You want to continue your fascinating dissertation on the load-bearing capacity of Italian cobblestones, or do you want to talk about how my ladder can comfortably reach that rapidly igniting roof from right here without so much as breathing on your precious, decorative, and highly flammable paving?" Brenda finally snapped out of her stupor. Her face, which had been a mask of stunned disbelief, contorted into a rictus of pure, unadulterated fury. She went from pale to puce in about 3 seconds flat. It was quite the spectacle. This is an unapproved vehicle!" she shrieked, her voice cracking. "It's oversized! It's aggressively red! That is not an approved HOA color for anything." She was actually stamping her foot now. Her sensible beige loafer made a sad little scuffing sound on the asphalt. "Actually, Brenda," I corrected cheerfully, "it's Rescue Red." It's a classic, very reassuring to people whose houses are currently not on fire, thanks to its timely intervention. Now, are you going to politely step aside and allow the professionals and their enthusiastic amateur assistant to do their jobs, or do I need to demonstrate this rig's surprisingly nimble turning radius? I bluffed. The turning radius was, in fact, comparable to that of a medium-sized aircraft carrier, but she didn't need to know that. The fire captain, bless his pragmatic heart, seized the moment. "All right, Henderson," he yelled, suddenly galvanized. "If you can get that ladder up, put it on the south corner of that roof. Miller, Davis, can you clear this obstruction so my other crew can get closer with the ground lines?" The next few minutes were a blur of organized chaos and pure, unadulterated awesome. I maneuvered the aerial cat with a surprising, even to me, degree of precision, extending the outriggers onto the solid, non-decorative part of the street. The massive ladder unfurled with a satisfying hydraulic hiss, reaching high over Mrs. Henderson's rapidly singeing azaleas. The fire crew from the first engine, now liberated from Brenda's regulatory clutches, cheered. Brenda, meanwhile, was having a full-blown, foot-stomping, arm-waving meltdown. Officer Davis, looking like he was trying very hard not to laugh, was attempting to gently but firmly escort her to the sidelines. "He can't just do this!" she wailed, pointing a trembling, accusatory finger at me as I engaged the water pump. A powerful stream of water erupted from the nozzle at the top of the ladder, hitting the burning edge of the roof with pinpoint accuracy. "I am the president of this homeowners association. I have bylaws." "Ma'am," Officer Davis said, his voice taking on a sterner edge. "Right now he's the guy with the very big water hose who is actively preventing a catastrophe that you, by all accounts, were exacerbating. We can sort out the HOA bylaws and your presidency later, perhaps at a formal inquiry. Right now you need to step aside, take a deep breath, and refrain from further obstructing a multi-agency emergency response, or the only bylaw you'll be discussing is the one about interfering with official police and fire business. And trust me, that one doesn't come with a laminated card. It was beautiful, truly. The arc of the water against the smoky sky, the dying hiss of the flames as they met their match, the collective sigh of relief from the gathered neighbors. And Brenda, sputtering like a damp firework, finally being led away by a very patient, very unimpressed Officer Miller. The look on her face was a glorious cocktail of impotent rage, utter disbelief, and the dawning, horrified realization that her reign of beige terror might actually be over. Priceless, absolutely priceless. The fire was out. Mrs. Henderson's house, miraculously, was saved with only minor damage to the eaves and a few traumatized rose bushes. She was on her porch, wrapped in a blanket, tearfully thanking everyone, the firefighters, the police officers, and especially me and my magnificent, heroic machine, as she called it. She even offered the aerial cat a saucer of milk, mistaking its rumbling diesel idol for a contented purr. It was adorable. The fire captain, whose name I learned was Johnson, shook my hand so vigorously I thought he might dislocate my shoulder. "Henderson," he said, his face grimy but beaming. "You, my friend, are a certifiable lunatic, but you absolutely saved the day. That fire was about 2 minutes from getting into her attic. You ever want a real job with the department? Just kidding. Mostly. We could use a guy with your kind of initiative." Officer Davis sidled up, his notepad now in hand, though the smile lines around his eyes were more pronounced. "Gonna have to file a somewhat unorthodox report on this, you know, Henderson," he said quietly. "The city attorney and possibly the DA might have a few questions about the, shall we say, unconventional deployment of privately owned, heavy-duty emergency response equipment by a civilian. But off the record?" He leaned in conspiratorially. "That was the most fun I've had on a call in 10 years. "Understood, officer," I said, trying to look suitably chastened and not at all like a conquering hero. "Happy to cooperate fully. Just trying to be a good neighbor, you know?" Davis actually cracked a genuine smile then. "You did that, Henderson, and then some. As for her—" He jerked his head towards Brenda, who was now sitting in the back of Officer Miller's cruiser, looking less like a fearsome HOA president and more like a damp, disgruntled badger. I have a sneaking suspicion her tenure as the she-wolf of Cottonwood Creek might be drawing to a swift and ignominious close. My security camera, the one disguised as an uninteresting rock, had, it turned out, captured some very interesting footage the night before the shed stake sabotage incident. Footage of a shadowy figure, remarkably similar in height and build to a certain HOA president, meticulously and furtively relocating Sal's carefully placed markers under the cover of darkness. When Sal, with my permission, presented this footage at an emergency HOA meeting a few days later, a meeting called specifically to discuss Brenda's Firegate scandal, the collective gasp in the community clubhouse could have sucked all the oxygen out of the room. Brenda, predictably, tried to defend herself. She rambled about the sanctity of bylaws, the importance of aesthetic uniformity, the structural integrity of decorative paving, and how my Rescue Red ladder engine had probably traumatized the neighborhood squirrels. No one was buying it. Not anymore. The sight of their HOA president actively blocking a fire truck, juxtaposed with clear video of her committing petty sabotage, was a bit too much even for the most staunch beige aficionado. It was Gerald, quiet, nervous Gerald, who finally found his voice. He stood up, trembling slightly, his face flushed. "Brenda," he said, his voice surprisingly firm. "You endangered lives. You abused your power for years. You moved stakes. You tried to ban Halloween. We've had enough. We want our non-regulation petunias back, and we want them now." "Okay." He didn't actually say the Petunia part out loud, but I could see it in his eyes. A vote of no confidence was called. It was practically unanimous. Brenda was out, stripped of her title, her power, her laminated bylaw cards. A new HOA board was elected on the spot, a refreshingly normal group of people who seemed more interested in planning a neighborhood barbecue than measuring lawn heights to the millimeter. The evil was defeated. Beigezilla had fallen. The reign of terror was over. And my workshop? With the new, infinitely more reasonable HOA board, my plans, rustic barn red siding, correct enough roof pitch, and all were approved with a cheerful wave and a "Looks great, Mike. Can't wait to see it finished." Sal and his crew, now local heroes in their own right, got to work. The workshop rose, big and beautiful and unapologetically red, in my backyard. It was everything I'd dreamed of. Soundproofed, spacious, with a door big enough to drive a small car through, or, a very large collection of vintage service vehicle parts. Sarah even admitted it looked impressively substantial, and not nearly as sun-blocking as she'd feared. The final touch? I found a massive, gleaming brass fire bell at a salvage yard. I polished it until it shone like the sun, and mounted it proudly next to the workshop's main door. A little reminder of the day common sense, and a very large ladder truck, prevailed. A few weeks later, I was out front, enjoying the California sunshine, and giving my car an aggressively shiny wax treatment, just because I could. A battered tow truck rumbled down the street and pulled up to Brenda's house. Two beefy guys hopped out, and after a brief, muffled argument from inside Brenda's screen door, started hooking up her golf cart, the one she used to patrol the neighborhood like a pint-sized beige dictator on wheels. Turns out, without her HOA president stipend, and facing potential fines from the city for obstruction of emergency services, Brenda was having a few cash flow issues. The repo men were not, I noted with satisfaction, impressed by her attempts to cite them for unapproved tire tread depth on a public street. Kevin, the new HOA president, a chill surfer dude in his late 30s who'd once tried to get surfing declared an official HOA-sponsored sport, ambled by, walking his golden retriever, whose leash, I noticed, was a vibrant, non-regulation turquoise. "Morning, Mike," Kevin called out, flashing a shaka sign. "Workshop's looking totally epic, dude. Righteous bell, man. Very feng shui for, fighting fires and stuff." "Thanks, Kevin," I grinned back. "Just doing my part to keep the neighborhood safe, and stylish, and appropriately accessorized." Sarah came out with 2 mugs of coffee, handing one to me. She watched the tow truck disappear down the street with Brenda's sad little golf cart in tow. A small, satisfied smile played on her lips. She said, taking a sip of her coffee, "for a guy who claimed he just wanted a quiet, out-of-the-way place for his hobbies, you certainly have a knack for making a rather dramatic entrance onto the neighborhood scene." I slung an arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. "Hey," I said, winking. "When opportunity knocks, sometimes it's driving a 60-foot, 30-ton, cherry-red, historically significant aerial ladder engine. You thinking of getting a matching one for your gardening tools? Could probably reach the top shelf in the pantry with it, too." Sarah just laughed, shaking her head, the sunlight catching the new, slightly rebellious streak of purple she'd recently added to her hair. "Just stick to your workshop, Mike, and maybe try to keep the deployment of heavy rescue vehicles to a minimum this year, okay?" "No promises," I said, grinning. Yeah, life in Cottonwood Creek Estates was finally looking up. The petunias were unregulated, the gnomes were frolicking freely, and the only beige in sight was the occasional passing UPS truck. And if any other power-crazed HOA Karens ever tried to stand between a fire truck and a fire in my neighborhood, well, let's just say I knew a guy. A guy with a very big, very red, workshop-approved solution. And this time, I even had a city ordinance-compliant, architecturally sound, and beautifully rustic barn-red place to park it, mostly.